Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm so glad you all are here and we get to talk about this interesting discussion of a mind and body journey to treating depression and anxiety and moving from those states to a state of vitality. I see we have people from nearby me in Gloucester and Rockport. I'm here in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And we also have people from Rhode Island, North Carolina, other places in Massachusetts, Connecticut. So I welcome you all. I am a certified bioenergetic therapist and an international trainer for the International Institute of Bioenergetic Analysis. I have a practice here right next to my house where I am in Gloucester, where I've been for about 20 years. And I really feel blessed and honored to be able to do this work of working with people with their bodies to get more into feel more into their bodies and be more alive and have more joy in their lives. So I'm excited to share this material with you and to welcome you to use some of what I'll teach you about. I also want to invite you to ask questions during the presentation. I don't want to get too far off the presentation on a lot of questions, but if you have a question, feel free to ask it. I am imperfect, and sometimes I say something that needs more clarification or that people wonder about. So feel free to raise your hand and we'll ask you to unmute and ask a question, and then we'll leave time at the end for questions as well. So I'm going to share my screen now and show you my presentation. Let's see. Oh, it says screen sharing is paused. Resume share. There we go. So this is my office here. It's my picture of my little cottage in the spring with the flowers around it, and those are my credentials. In the workshop today, we're going to be talking about how treatment for depression and anxiety I see as a path, and about the energetics of depression, and I'll do an experiential piece with that as well. Also about anxiety, an overview of the body-mind dynamics of anxiety with an experiential piece. I will talk about the bioenergetic body-mind treatment approaches to depression and anxiety, and about vitality as an aim, as an antidote for depression and for anxiety. And I'll give you some tools you can use and invite questions. So before we get started, just want to welcome everybody to do a little stretch and check in with yourself. What does your body need at this moment to be able to settle in and listen and pay attention? So just let your attention come to your own body. And if you need to move around a little bit in your chair, or maybe move your hands, shrug your shoulders, check in with your breathing. In this work of bioenergetics, body awareness, both for ourselves as the therapist or as the mental health practitioner, is the beginning. And it's also where I generally always invite my clients to start. So throughout this presentation, I invite you to keep letting your awareness come back to your own body and to what you need to be as relaxed as you can be and comfortable. And if you need some movement or stretching, to please feel free to do that. So to start, this is right next to my office and my house, my yard, and it's a labyrinth. And if you're not familiar with a labyrinth, you go in one path and it takes you right up towards the center, but then you wind around and it's a twisty, turny path that you go through to walk through all those different quadrants, and then you come into the center. And I like this as a metaphor for the treatment of depression, especially I'm talking about severe long-term deep depression, although it relates, of course, to other kinds of depression as well. And anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, panic, those kinds of entrenched experiences that we see with our clients. And in this culture, especially, I know we want an easy path. We want to just go from here to here. And if you do these three things, then you'll treat your client and they'll be well and everything will be well. And in my experience, that's not how it works. It's a windy path, and sometimes it looks like you're real close to where you want to be, but then you have to wind around a little bit more and keep going on the journey. But it's the keeping going, the keeping walking. And as mental health professionals, as we keep walking with our clients, even when it's hard, even when we might feel hopeless or like, what's the use? Are they ever going to get better? Keep putting one foot in front of the other. And that movement is really key to the treatment. I want to give you a definition of depression that is probably different from what you've heard before. This comes from my colleague Terry Hunt, who is also a certified bioenergetic therapist and a local trainer for the Massachusetts Society of Bioenergetic Analysis. He says that depression is an economic solution to a perceived impossible condition. The economic solution relates to what we all know as those body realities of depression, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. But where the body economy, in response to something that we perceive as impossible to change or to affect change on, the body pulls in energy. We notice changes in eating, appetite, decreased appetite, sleeping, either too much sleeping or not enough sleeping. And that's what we mean by the economic solution. And then the perceived impossible conditions, sometimes the condition really is impossible, but maybe there's something that can happen in the midst of what's impossible. And we'll be talking more about that as well. But the word perceived is what's really important there, that our client, the person who's depressed, feels like there's nothing that can happen here that can change. And that's why the body economy pulls in its energy. If there's no possibility for change, there's no reason to take risks, and there's no energy for that. So I invite you to do this along with me to see what this feels like in your body. Now, I'm not going to leave you there, so don't worry about that. But to really feel the energetics of depression in the body. So as I say it, see if you can identify this or do it in your own body. So it's a heaviness. Oftentimes people say, I feel heavy in my chest, a lack of motivation, decreased energy, decreased breathing or shallow breathing or holding the breath, collapsed posture, your head hanging down. Let's see if you can let yourself do that. Let your head hang down, collapse your chest, and a lack of excitement. And I have here, for people who with visual, who cannot see, I have a picture of a woman who is in this posture with her head hanging down, collapsed chest, that sense of heaviness. So notice what that feels like in your body. And the point about this is, if we only change a person's mind, if we're only working with their thoughts, but we haven't done anything about what's happening in their bodies, is that the condition of depression going to lighten? Maybe a little bit, but we really need to address what's happening in their body in order to get to those underlying dynamics, to change the underlying energetic processes. Okay, so now everybody roll your shoulders back. Taking a big breath. Maybe move your head a little. Oh, maybe give yourself a little shake. So shake that off. Shake that off. Let that go. So here are some examples of what we mean by impossible conditions that lead to depression. And I have here a picture of an older man scolding a child. So as I say these, think about what you feel in your body in response to these social realities. So the impact of the isms that damage people, like racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, colonialism. These are negative beliefs about people that impact their self-esteem and their place in the world, and that cannot be changed by one of us alone. We can't change somebody else's racism. Now, collectively, there are certainly things we can do to change these issues, but one-on-one, we can't change the whole culture with these deeply ingrained negative stereotypes and perceptions of people. Also, poverty is a social reality. So people that have a lack of financial resources in order to be able to enjoy their lives. And an chronic unequal access to resources, which we know very well in this culture is a big problem, and certainly can and does feel impossible to change. Also, responses to sexual preference or gender identity. If somebody comes out to their friends or their family, or even if they don't come out, but they are not accepted for their sexual preference or their gender identity, that can feel impossible to earn people's acceptance and loving through that. Childhood experiences, developmental trauma, abuse, neglect, not being able to get the love and approval that we needed from our parents or our primary caregivers, or outright abuse, for sure, can be and feel impossible and is impossible to change in and of itself. The things that come from that: self-hate, guilt, chronic shame, deep shame, and feel impossible to change. Current boundary violations in our lives. If somebody has a boss that is chronically mean to them or degrading of them or puts them down or expects too much. Similarly, abusive relationships that don't offer support and uplift us. And losses of all kinds. So losing a child, a partner, losses through the pandemic were impossible to change. Also, loss of a home or loss of a job. All those kinds of losses can feel impossible, and in some ways are impossible. Now, I also want to point out the very key thing that there are forces within society and within families that keep people in these depressed states. And we need to have this in the back of our minds as well, that there can be unconscious or sometimes conscious power dynamics in relationships. And sometimes somebody's depression actually serves the people in power. They get to look down on people. Oh, they're just depressed, so that's their problem. It means that there's not something within me, if I'm the one in power, that I need to change. So there's a force that keeps disempowered people in a one down position. and maintains the status quo. It justifies my hierarchy. And if I think I'm better than somebody because they're depressed and I'm not, and that I can dominate them again, because if I'm perceiving them as less than because of their depression. And it reduces the responsibility along with owning the necessary guilt and shame of those in power to change those dynamics. Finally, if we are looking down on people because they are depressed, then we don't have to be uncomfortable, and we're kind of keeping them depressed. We're not going to change anything because it serves us to have them be depressed. Then it minimizes what the discomfort we have to feel from them being angry and protesting. So I think it's important to keep this in the back of our mind as well, that there are forces that keep people in depressed states. So in terms of treatment for depression, then we need to help our clients separate what's impossible in that situation from what is possible. So for example, I was talking about this definition and at a presentation I gave last year, and a woman came up to me and said, "Please help me. I don't understand what can be possible. My dear friend who is in her 20s died tragically, and I've been heartbroken over the loss of my friend." And I said to her, that is impossible that your friend would come back. And you need to grieve about that. And it is tragic and so sad. So that is impossible. What is possible is, what did you love about your friend? What do you remember about her? And she talked about how her friend loved different kinds of lipstick. And I said to her, could you go buy one of those kinds of beautiful lipstick that she loved and keep that around in your house as a memory of her? You can keep the memory of her and let the memory of her live on. That is possible, even though bringing her back is impossible. Similarly, with our clients, changing what happened to them in their past, or sometimes even what's happening in the present, may be impossible. However, what might be possible is to help them believe in themselves and to set some boundaries with the people that aren't treating them well, and certainly to help them feel all of the feelings that they feel about what's happening, and to own their anger, to grieve about it, and to learn to set boundaries where they can in their lives. It's also important that one other thing I wanted to say about that, in terms of the impossible conditions, oftentimes the condition may be out of the person's awareness. And so it's not something that I ask my clients. This is very important, because they may not be able to tell me, or it may not be so simple and straightforward for them. But in the process of our work, I keep it in the back of my mind. So rather than, for example, saying, oh, this depression is a chemical imbalance and they just need medications. Now, they may need medications, so I'm not dissing medications, but I am also looking in the back of my mind and saying, what is it that they experience or experienced as being impossible? And sometimes people don't understand that how their parents treated them was impossible, or something that happened in their childhood, like adoption, the being able to have a connection with their birth mother, the loss of the birth mother, they may be out of their awareness as something that is causing deep grief and leading to depression in them. So I keep this in the back of my mind, and I'm looking, as through our work together, and looking for where to help them make that link to situations or conditions that are contributing to their depression, to their depressed state. And it's very important. And also naming the roots and social conditions, societal conditions, saying, yes, we live in a society that, particularly many of us in Massachusetts were pretty lucky, but in some other states where we all know about they're not allowing people to teach about slavery, the history of this country in the schools. It's just unimaginable, that level. And they're making laws that people aren't allowed to say gay. It's just unthinkable. Anyway, those social conditions that contribute to depression, to name that, yes, of course, it's understandable that you feel depressed because that is impossible to change. But let's look for what we might be able to do within that. I also work with body work, with specific exercises to invite deep expressions of grief, to allow the emotions to come through more fully, and to promote healthy expression of anger and encourage nonviolent protest. It's really, really an important part of coming out of a state of depression, is getting the energy of change, protest, anger, grief moving in the person. Okay, we're going to do breakout rooms, and we're going to have 2 people per room. And our Chris Belly, who works for the NASW in Boston and does such a great job, so we all want to give her a round of appreciation. She's going to set up the breakout rooms. They're going to be 2 people per room. And what I would like you to do is, the person who lives, I also want to tell you, if you don't want to do the breakout room, you're welcome to let us know that, and you can stay here in the room with me, and I will answer questions, and we'll have a conversation together. So that's totally fine. You get to choose whether you want to be in a breakout room with somebody or not. The person who lives furthest from the Boston NASW office will go first. And they will name a time that you felt depressed. So choose a relatively, it doesn't have to be the worst ever, but choose a relatively minor situation. And we all have these where we felt maybe just depressed for a day or a couple of days. And discuss what was impossible in that situation. I want to get you to start thinking about this in terms of what was impossible, and then what was possible. And as you're talking about it, notice what you feel in your body, and talk about that as well, and then switch partners. Each person will have 5 minutes, and Chris Belly will let you know when 4 minutes is up, and then tell you to change. And then the next person will have 5 minutes. She'll let you know 4 minutes, and then we'll all come back to the main room. All right, so I'm going to stop the share now, everybody. I wonder if anybody has a question. Yeah, everybody's coming back. Great. Welcome back. It's nice to see your faces. Does anybody have a question that came up, or anything they would like to share briefly from that? We'll just take 1 or 2 people. Anything you learned? Any questions? No? Okay. Oh, there's somebody. Jane, yes, great.
One of the things that we kind of talked about in our little breakout was wondering whether there's a sort of either cultural or temperamental inclination toward depression or anxiety when you're faced with some kind of very stressful situation.
Oh, absolutely. Right. Yes. Yes. that depression, actually, I didn't say that. Depression is a normal, depression in response to an event, to something happening, or one of those societal conditions that I talked about is normal. Yes, that the organism pulling in its energy, especially like with grief. So a period of depression after grief is totally natural. And I think one of the things about our culture is we tend to minimize that. We tend to say, oh, you should get on with it, you should get over it, you should get on with it. But it's partly how the organism is saying, I need to use my energy in a different way than my normal being out in the world. I need to process this loss and the feelings that I have about it. So, and where it becomes a problem is when it's chronic and there isn't a clear reason for it, or it lingers on too long, then we need to look at what else is going on. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, good. Anybody else have any questions? Thank you, Jane. Or anything they want to share? Okay. I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint. Let's see, resume share. And we're going to talk a little bit about anxiety now. And again, thank you for bringing that up, Jane. It's so important because anxiety is also normal in response to conditions where we're afraid or worried about something happening. And it's a message from the organism that we need some extra energy to pay attention, that there might be something happening that we need that energy for. So it is a normal response. The problem is when it's chronic and we don't know what it's in response to, and we haven't learned any ways to help bring ourselves down. I know for me, I had a health scare with my partner recently, and I didn't sleep for a couple of nights. I was worried, and that it's a normal response to situations that cause us fear. And I could feel it was my organism like trying to start to prepare me for, is something bad going to happen here that I'm going to need to respond to differently than in my normal life? So I think of anxiety as being fear that's in motion. There's fear that has us in a free stance, not in motion, but anxiety, it's in motion. And we're cut off from our feelings in general. We can't really access whether we're sad or angry or happy, cut off in that way. And there are physical aspects to it, of heart racing, sweaty palms, shallow breathing, and mental aspects of worrying, thinking about the future, the past. And there are times, again, that situational where it makes sense that we might need some extra energy in response to something particular, or it's chronic and we don't know what it's about. We don't understand the cause of it. And it can have developmental aspects from childhood experiences, especially if the parent was anxious and passed that on to the child through their body and through their organism and the way they behaved. So I'm going to invite you to do this with me also. The energetics of anxiety. So the energy is up in the head. So try to actually focus on your head, focus on your thoughts. Don't focus. Normally I do a lot of work with grounding with people that I'll show you more about in a minute. But so try to be not grounded. See what that's like. And breathe a little shallowly. And think about something in the past or in the future. So I'm worried about, whatever it could be. What's going to happen this evening? Who's going to behave in what way? So see where your thoughts go with that. Okay, now shake that off and stamp your feet down. If you're sitting, stamp your feet down so come down into the ground a little bit. But just notice what that felt like in your body. And there are images here for people who have a lot energy going on in their head. They look worried and upset. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the anxiety, energy, muscle tension connection. So if we think of anxiety as fear in the body, and we have a guy here who looks quite scared. It's a cartoon of a guy looking scared. And fear in the body leads to tense muscles. So everybody tense your muscles a little bit. And notice, what does that feel like in your body? I know that you don't want to have tense muscles chronically, but just notice a little bit. And what happens to your breathing when you tense your muscles, and to your feelings. And notice how that blocks your energy, your emotions, your expressions. So we know a lot about trauma and the nervous system. Trauma also affects the muscles in the body. So chronically tight muscles and are a result of early childhood trauma. And it holds back, it blocks the energy or the emotions or the expression that was not acceptable in the childhood environment. And we don't know that now as an adult, it might be acceptable for me to cry or to be angry or to be joyful even. We live as if from that childhood reality that those emotions are not acceptable. And this can become, that muscle tension can become chronic anxiety in a person that we would need to address both in the body and by understanding the roots of that muscle tension. What happened that we learn to block our emotions, our expressions, and our energy. Again, there are forces, often unconscious, in society and in families that contribute to people having anxiety. So if people are really afraid, I think newspapers feed on this to a certain extent. It sells newspapers if people are afraid and anxious. They want to know what's happening. It also makes it easier for people in power to control others. If they're afraid, then I can more easily step in and control them. It can feed on people's desire to have an all-knowing authority. So people that want to be in a position of the authority and be all-knowing and have power over others, it feeds them for people to be anxious. It lowers the self-esteem of the person who is anxious. Again, it can sort of dismiss them, people who want to control other people. Oh, something's wrong with them because they're anxious. So they can blame the person for that rather than looking at what am I doing to contribute to their anxiety. And reduces the need for those in power to own their own limitations and challenges and how they might be contributing to the situations that keep people anxious. So I'm going to ask everybody to participate this time. Think of a time you felt anxious, not the worst, but maybe minorly anxious. And think about what did you sense in your body at that time? If you can access what did you feel in your body when you were anxious? And identify, what were you afraid of? What did you fear? So while you all were in the breakout rooms, somebody asked the question, when I ask people, what do they sense in their bodies? What do I do with that? And oftentimes, especially with anxiety, somebody will say, I'm anxious. And I always ask, what does that mean to you? Because for you in your body, because if I can get them to connect with their body, we've already started down the path of addressing the anxiety. Oh, I feel my breathing is shallow, or oh, I feel tense in my shoulders. And what I'll often have them do then is exaggerate that. I'll say, I know you don't want to have your breathing shallow, or you don't want to be tense in your shoulders over the long run, but as an exploration, how about you exaggerate it? So make your shoulders more tense and see, is there a feeling there? Is there a color? Is there a message? What is your body telling you that you need to pay attention to? And then I'll see where it goes. And 99% of the time, that leads us to another place. And then asking them to identify, what is it that you are actually afraid of? Because oftentimes they get anxious about their anxiety. I'm guessing other people have experienced that. The client is anxious about being more anxious. So I want to help them slow it down, break it down, and what is it that they're afraid of? And is there something that happened right before they got anxious, or that they're thinking about in the future, that led to that response of anxiety? The other thing that I work with is body exercises to help them open up their breathing, deepen their breathing, and be more grounded in their bodies. So I'm going to show you some pictures of that in just a minute here. So what I am saying is that effective treatment for anxiety and for depression, and again, I'm talking about the chronic, deep manifestations of these, not passing depression in response to something specific or passing anxiety in response to something specific, but the things that bring our clients into therapy for. So we need to work with the body realities and make some changes in what's happening in the person's body. We also need to work with their mind and understanding what's happening in their mind, the mental processes they're telling themselves. And we need to work with their spirit, with uplifting their spirit and building their spiritual connection so they have something to rely on in difficult times. And we need to deepen their emotional processes, help them work through painful emotions in response to both their present and their past, and to let those emotions go deeply through the body. In this culture, again, we have a real tendency to dismiss our emotions, and that causes a lot of pain that doesn't need to be there, and contributes, I believe, to that deep depression and anxiety. So definitely encouraging, inviting, and normalizing emotional expression is so important for all of us. We also need to help people in their relational skills so that they are not having boundary violations in the present. And then analysis. So understanding the impact of environmental, both their immediate environment and societal environmental issues, and as well as their childhood, on what's happening with them currently, what they are bringing in. So this is Dr. Alexander Lowen, who founded bioenergetic analysis, which is the type of therapy, the therapy approach that I practice. And he's written several books, and this is from one of his books titled The Way to Vibrant Health, a Manual of Bioenergetic Exercises. He says, as we all know, mind and body can influence each other. It is almost impossible for a depressed person to lift himself, I apologize for his male language, so himself or herself, I will add, or themselves, out of depression thinking positive thoughts. This is because the person's energy level is depressed. When their energy level is raised through deep breathing, so we need to help them deepen their breathing. And I'm talking about unconscious breathing patterns here, not just thinking about taking a deeper breath. and the release of feeling. So oftentimes there are emotions that were blocked from a long time ago that muscle tension and the held breath restrict in them. So when we do those things, the person can come out of the depressed state. And I've seen this with many, many, many of my clients in very satisfying ways. So start with body awareness, asking what are you aware of sensing in your body. I want them to get used to, on a regular basis, noticing what's happening in their body. And I ask this question a lot. It's like home base for me. If I don't know where to go with a client in a moment, I can always come back to what's happening in your body, or as you're telling me this, what are you aware of sensing in your body? I also, as a therapist, stay very aware of my own body because it is like a resonator to help me understand what's happening with my client and what's happening in their body and where they need to go, how to help them shift some of these deeply ingrained patterns. I use exercises for grounding, and this is a picture of me doing the grounding exercise in my office, where I am bent over, my upper body's bent over, and the weight is in my feet. And this is also a picture of some of my colleagues at a conference where we were doing a bioenergetic exercise class together, where we bend over, or we might be laying on the floor and put our feet up into the air. This helps people get out of their head. So again, remember that anxiety is too much going on in the head, and into their body, their attention into their body, and more connected to the ground. It helps build self-confidence, stability, sense of stability in the world, and connection to oneself. So it's really the foundation of self-possession and a feeling good. I also talk about grounding as it's similar if you compared it to where electricity, there are two prongs, and one of those carries the charge and the other is grounding. So in order to carry more charge, and one of the problems in depression is we don't have enough charge, there's not enough energy going in the body. But to have more charge, we need to be more grounded. And in anxiety, the charge is up in the head too much. It's not grounded through the body. So for both depression and anxiety and all kinds of trauma and PTSD, grounding exercises are key. I use this with pretty much every single one of my clients, some kind of grounding exercise, and I do it for myself regularly. I also do an exercise for strengthening personal boundaries. Oh, sorry about the phone. I forgot to unplug it, but it'll go through. So a lot of our boundary communications happen non-verbally. So I work with people with their bodies so that they can coordinate their verbal communications with their nonverbal communications. And there are images here of me again in my office with my hands out, palms facing outward. And again, I'm grounded in my feet and pushing out, which is making a boundary limit. And then reaching out, because boundaries also, we need to be able to reach out and ask for or express what we need and want and bring that to ourselves. And then there's a woman here with in a drawing with one hand with setting a limit and one hand reaching out. So sometimes we need to, in our relationships, we need to both set a limit and reach out. I use these exercises with my clients a lot, and it can bring up feelings, memories from their past, from when they had boundary violations as a child, or in the present, and it's very effective. And I also have them add some words to it, express a no or an I want. And I work with exercises. This is again in my office. This is me over an exercise ball. and also over what we call a bioenergetic stool, which looks kind of like a sawhorse with a blanket, something soft rolled over it. And what I'm doing is opening up the whole front of my body and opening the breathe to expand the breathing. So again, if we look at that in depression, a person is not breathing fully enough. They've restricted their breathing to hold back emotions. So we want to invite them to open up and let those emotions come through them more fully. And once the emotions come through, then they will naturally breathe more deeply and fully. It's something that I work with, again, with myself. I have an exercise ball like this in my house, and I do this pretty much every night to release whatever I've taken from the day and to keep my breathing open and my emotions moving through me. And I use it a lot with my clients who are able. Some people can't do this, it's too big of a stretch. And I have ways that I adapt that for them. I might have them on a mattresses over a yoga bolster or something like that. That's a gentler stretch. But I want to help them open up their body and release those tensions that are held. So Alexander Lowen says that the path to joy leads through despair. And back again, in terms of depression, despair is central in depression. What's the use? Why bother? There's no point. It is that kind of energetic collapse. So we need to not bypass the despair. But again, and here is a picture of me actually on a snowy pond. It could be a day like this, except where I am, we don't have snow, but we do have cold, where I actually made a labyrinth pattern by walking around in the snow, and my little dog is there too. And again, so that if we're in the despair, we have to keep walking, keep moving. It's a message that we need to let that go through us, but keep moving till we get to the joy. And movement is key. Can't just sit there. We have to move our bodies in order to feel better. I also work with people with expressing emotions, particularly anger, which has two different forms it has many different forms, but two really important different forms. One, this is me on the mattresses in my office doing a kicking exercise. So for all the things in life that we can't control and we can't change, it's kind of like a child having a temper tantrum. And it's so important in depression because it's the why. So I'll have people lay down on the mattresses and actually kick and say why. And that expression, allowing that to move through their body, to feel that, the why, the protests, I don't like it. We all need to do that sometimes. And I also have here, I use, I have a bat and a tennis racket and big pillows, and I help people move anger about things that they do want to change. It's the no more, I won't take it. And it builds strength in the body to allow anger to go through them. And we all need to have that anger available to us to affect changes in our world and in our culture that are so important. So having our anger available for protecting ourselves, for protecting our planet, for protecting what we value in this country is key. A lot of people have a lot of fear about their anger, so I'll talk them through that and go into this gently so that they can learn to not fear their anger and express it appropriately. I have had some people that have had trouble with their anger, and once, it's gotten them into trouble in their relationships, they express it inappropriately. Generally, my experience is when I give them a place and say, here, get as angry as you want, and I have them ground. I have very specific ways to work with this with them so they don't go out of control. And I do it with people that I know well. I wouldn't do this on a first session with somebody. And then allow them to let that go through their body and to feel it as an energy that they don't need to be afraid of. What happens is they become different in their relationships. They're able to hold it back, to contain it when it's appropriate. And then they know that there are places where they can let it out. Just one other thing about this, about anger. Alexander Lowen, this is a diagram from one of his books. And in the diagram, there's a circle and with an arrow going into it and a kind of a bite out of the circle. And he says that when there's been an insult or attack, and I lump all kinds of trauma in this, childhood trauma, all kinds of injuries, car accidents, the whole range of trauma is an insult. May not be a specific attack, but it is an attack on the organism. So expanding what we mean by the word attack, it violates the integrity of the organism. It actually, here in this diagram, there's a bite out of it. And chronic shame is an example of that. Low self-esteem is an example of that. And the reaction in the form of anger seeks to restore the integrity of the organism. So I'm aware that if somebody's had a lot of childhood trauma, I'm looking for ready for when the anger is going to come out, because it's an important part of the healing process. Other tools and techniques that I use, exploring a person's history and their story is very important, and linking that to the history, to what's happening in the present, and to what's happening in their body. I have some exercises that I do that are very effective for clearing negative self-talk. I'll use some of those, the boundary exercise, and like I'll be the negative voice and have them set a boundary to that. Affirming their sexuality. So a lot of people have tensions in their pelvis that are literal tension, body tensions that keep them from enjoying their sexuality, and that relate to, again, all kinds of violations from their childhood or later in life, that have caused them to hold back sexuality. And what I mean by sexuality is the energy and the desire within us for sexuality, not necessarily who we're expressing that with, but having sexual energy available to us. I help them build tolerance for charge. So again, a person who's chronically depressed, not breathing very fully, needs help to open up so they can have more charge going through their body, and charge being both breathing, deeper breathing, fuller sense of sexuality, and anger, all of that. And it takes time to build that. It's not something that just happens overnight. Releasing deep old guilt and shame is important. I have exercises I use for that are very effective, that are body-based as well. And affirming their spirit, their joy and their pleasure in their lives is so important. And I'll tell you a story about that in just a moment. And finally, my relationship with them, my caring about them within the confines of the therapy relationship is very important, especially for people that didn't experience that as children. I have a client that I worked with for about 9 years whose mother didn't want to have children. And I have learned as a bioenergetic therapist to see that in the structure of her body. She's very thin, and the skin is very tight over her muscles. So she's actually gaunt, very thin. And our relationship, she told me, and she recently terminated because she's doing so well. She told me regularly what it meant, how much it meant to her that I care about her, and that she didn't get that with her mother. So our caring about our clients is a very important part of what we do. So we are aiming for vitality. And I like this because to me, it goes beyond like, so what do we have if we're not chronically depressed or chronically anxious? And our answer to that is we have vitality. And vitality is a physical and mental process. I have some pictures here of Alexander Lowen with his warm smile as an older man, a young boy who's very alive and joyful, a mother and her daughter that are sharing a delicious looking embrace, and a bee with a flower. And these are images for me that express vitality. I think of vitality as including, I have an image here of a hands in a heart shape with a sun silhouetted with the ocean behind them. Vitality includes that the mind is relatively calm. Okay, now of course there's stressful moments where our mind isn't going to be calm, but as a steady state, relative calmness in our mind. Body has a general state of relaxation and full breathing. We're able to move freely as much as is possible given our body. We have an orientation to pleasure. We want to have pleasure and we seek it. Warm, bright eyes, so the spirit expressing through the eyes, and capacity for a full range of emotional expression. Ability to cry when things make us sad and to get angry about things we're angry about, to be joyful, and to admit when we're afraid. All of those are part of being alive, being fully alive. And satisfying relationships. So an ability to communicate our needs, to contain when we need to contain, and express when expression is called for. So I want to end with this quote from Howard Thurman, who was a civil rights activist and a friend of Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, "Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive and go do that. Because what the world needs is more people who have come alive." And in this picture, there's an image of a snow angel right near my house. There's a client that I work with who was terribly, terribly, terribly traumatized as a child. She was adopted when she was about 2 years old. Her adoptive, it was an awful adoption. It was a hugely bad adoption. The adoptive parents used, abused, neglected, did unimaginably horrible things to her day after day after day after day. So you can imagine sitting with this client is difficult sometimes. How do I help her? And she'll ask me, tell me something. And for a long time, I've worked with her for about 13 years now, multiple times per week. And for a while, I would think, what is she saying? What, people tell me things. They don't ask me to tell them something. What does she want from me? And I began to realize that what she wants is give me something that's outside of this trauma. She has nightmares, she's terrible, the memories, lots and lots of things in her life trigger memories. So she lives in that world all the time. She needs something outside of that. So this comes to the affirming pleasure and positive things in life. One day she came to my office, this was several years ago, and it had been snowing outside, and I had made a snow angel like this on this rock near the quarry where I live. And I said to her, have you ever made a snow angel? It was just kind of a flash. And she looked at me like I had 3 heads. She said, no, what's that? I've never made a snow angel. Nobody ever, when she was a child, nobody ever took delight in her or had fun with her. I said, come on, let's go. So out we went, and we laid down in the snow and made snow angels together. And to this day, if it's snowing and she's coming to my office, we'll say to one another, do you want to go make snow angels? And it's become like a something for her to hold on to, that life really, there is good in life, there is joy, and I can have some fun. And laying down in the snow, I can look up and see the sky and be present and have positive things. So that relates to vitality and to doing things and helping our clients become more alive. All right, so a couple things I just want to review. Tools you can use. So with depression, consider in your mind what might be the impossible condition. And especially when you have somebody that seems treatment resistant, I personally don't really like that word. I think it's not that they're treatment resistant, that term. I think it is that we don't know yet. We haven't figured out what the root of that depressed condition is. What did they experience as being impossible? So keep that in the back of your mind and help them consider what might be possible within that impossible condition. With anxiety, normalize their fear, encourage them to focus on body sensations. And you can even do, even if you don't know full grounding exercises, you can have people ground a little bit, put their feet flat on the floor, stamp them a little bit from sitting in the chair. And especially notice what's happening with their breathing and encourage them to breathe more fully. Explore what needs expression, what is blocked in them. Is it sadness? Is it anger? Is it joy or sexuality, pleasure, or fear? What is blocked and what needs expression? And do they need help making boundaries in their life? So you can use a little bit of the grounding exercises, observe their breathing patterns. There's also an exercise we use about anger that is twisting a towel that you can use without having all of the tools that I use in my office.
Hey, Lori, I just wanted to remind you that it is 1:19 now. We should be heading into the Q&A session very soon.
Perfect. I'm just going to go through a couple of things if people are interested in learning more about the bioenergetic approach. And it is a whole approach to psychotherapy that takes some time to learn. But we do have an online Zoom 3 sessions coming up March 17th, April 7th, and May 5th from 12 to 3:15 p.m., where there'll be some instructors teaching about grounding exercises, about breathing, and about this way of working with boundaries. And you can go to the website massbioenergetics.org to learn more about that. I taught an extensive class on bioenergetics through the Academy of Therapy Wisdom with 2 of my colleagues. And you can access that online through the academyoftherapywisdom.com. It's called Engaging the Body in Psychotherapy. And we have a conference coming up through the Massachusetts Society for Bioenergetic Analysis, and we welcome new people to come to our conference. This year's theme is bioenergetics and polyvagal theory, and it's at the beautiful Essex Woods Meeting and Retreat Center in Essex, Massachusetts. So that's really a lovely way to learn more about this work as well. We also have an extensive in-depth training program. And you could go to the website or follow up with me if you're interested in learning more about that. It's very deep personal growth in the context of an ongoing group and professional development, in-depth training. So that's all I have to say. This is from my website. Bioenergetic therapy provides a pathway to recover more vitality and joy of living. My website is at www.laurieure.com, and my email address is laurieure@aol.com. So I welcome you to follow up with me. I have lots of articles and other videos and podcasts that I've been interviewed on my website. So I welcome you to go there and take a look. So that ends what I have to say.